This is the Turn Your Life Around podcast, and I'm the 180 Lady. I've been helping people turn their lives around since 2007 as the founder and CEO of a large mental health company. The purpose of this podcast is to have meaningful conversations with old friends and new friends, everyday people just like you and me, about how they turn their lives around. We'll discuss all things mental health, fitness, finances, relationships, parenting, spirituality, you name it. My hope is that you can take something away that will encourage you today. I'm your host, Sarah Coates. Are you ready to turn your life around? Hello and welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining today. Sometimes I have a guest, and sometimes it's just me, myself, and I sharing a little knowledge or just some insights with you. And one of my favorite things that I love to talk about with my business coaching clients and my therapy clients is the topic of boundaries. And boy, I discovered boundary setting about a decade ago, and I think it changed my life. In fact, I think it turned my life around. Learning how to set healthier boundaries, learning how to set boundaries. Just a little self-disclosure, I am a people pleaser in recovery. I have always been a people pleaser. I was as a child. Who knows why, but I was. And I think it's hard for people pleasers to set healthy boundaries because we don't want to disappoint anyone. We want everyone to like us. And sometimes people pleasers feel like setting a boundary is mean. And so we don't want to do it. So I learned about boundaries about a decade ago, did a deep dive, did my own therapy, learned how to set them. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit about boundary setting. And I'm going to finish up this podcast, this little lunchable content, naming my top 3 boundary setting mantras. But first, what are boundaries? Some of you have heard this term. Some of you are very good at setting your own boundaries. And other people are like, what the heck is she talking about? What's a boundary? So I always think about boundaries like a property fence. Think about maybe your backyard, and it might be fenced in, and you're keeping what you love inside the fence. Maybe it's your little dog or your kids at play. And the fence is to keep things that you don't want entering in. It keeps them on the outside. It keeps those things on the outside. So boundaries are like a property fence. They're not hard and fast brick walls. They're fences. Sometimes they even think of them as you could reach over the fence and shake your neighbor's hand if you chose to, or you could just keep that fence up and stay inside of it. So think about boundaries like a property fence, and they are to protect yourself, those people that you love, the things in your life that you love and want to keep close to you. A lot of times I think about boundaries within the context of relationships or marriages. I'll just give you a quick example. A certain boundary I've had for myself in my marriage for a long time, 20 years now I've been married, it's a small little thing, but I've always had a boundary that I don't ride around in the car with someone of the opposite sex who is not my husband. A lot of people do for work and whatnot, and that's fine, but that's just my own personal boundary that I've always held to because not that I'm some big celebrity, but I'm recognizable enough in my community, and I wouldn't want anybody to see me riding around in a car with someone who's not my husband and speculate and gossip. So it's just a small standard I've always kept for myself, and that is a boundary within my marriage and my relationship. So that's an example of a boundary in relationships. Other boundaries might be, say, with your kids. Maybe you have a boundary that they have to shut their phones down by a certain time at night. That's a boundary. Or I've had a boundary with my kids. They don't get to have social media until they're 14. That's a boundary. Another boundary with kids, I talk about this in therapy a lot, is teaching your kids to have autonomy over themselves and be able to make their own decisions for themselves and their bodies. And something I've always implemented with my kids and encouraged others, parents, to do in parenting is not force your kids to hug or sit on Uncle Joe's lap or whatever the family dynamic is. There's shy kids, and then there's kids who just aren't feeling it that day. They don't want to give Uncle Bob a hug goodbye. And I've never forced my kids to do that because I want them as young girls to grow into these adult women who understand that I can say no, and no means no, and I have autonomy over my body. And so those are just some high-level examples of what a boundary is. A lot of times, clients will say to me, I didn't learn boundaries as a kid. We didn't even talk about boundaries. Grandma Susie would come over every Saturday morning at 7 a.m. banging on the door, and nobody ever told her no. And so a lot of times boundaries aren't even taught in families, but it's good. It's good that we are having these conversations now, and then you can be teaching your children and the next generation about healthy boundaries. A key point about boundaries is that boundaries should be communicated. I always take the approach that people can't read your mind. You can't just expect that others know your boundaries without actually communicating them. And so boundaries should be communicated. And also, one of my favorite things to say in therapy or with business coaching clients is that no is a complete sentence. You don't have to justify your no. Saying no when you feel that you need to say no, that is a justifiable boundary, and it's a complete sentence. I want to share with you my favorite 3 boundary setting mantras. I learned these about a decade ago. Actually, the third one is something that is more recent, but the first 2 came up about a decade ago when I started learning boundaries, and I wanted to share them with you. My first and utmost favorite boundary setting mantra is do no harm, take no. This is PG-13, so I'm going to fill in the word crap, but you can also fill in your own word. Do no harm, take no blank. Take no crap. Myself, my core value, love God, love people. I would never intend to do anyone harm, but I'm also not going to take your crap. And so setting boundaries is simply saying, no, I cannot do this, or no, I cannot go there, or no, I can't make it for that event, or that thing you're asking, we're going to have to readdress in the future. Whatever those boundaries are, communicating them, doing no harm, and just not taking any of the baloney that some people are going to shell out in this life. My second favorite boundary setting mantra. Again, we're PG-13 here, but you can fill in your own blanks. Boundaries are not bitchy, okay? Specifically, this is for people pleasers. And again, I'm talking to myself, but I'm talking to the rest of you that are people pleasers as well. Just because you set a boundary does not mean you're the B word. It doesn't make you a mean girl, a bad person, a horrible human. You have a right to set boundaries in this life. And so boundaries are not bitchy. You are not a B word if you set a boundary. So carry that with you today. I always say that walls keep people out. Boundaries show people where the door is. And so that right there in essence is why boundaries are not you know what. And then my final mantra that I want to share with you is I love myself enough to set boundaries. So if you think about this, going back to this whole idea of people pleasers, having difficulty setting boundaries, if you just let people walk all over you, in fact, that's a key thing, a key takeaway right there. When I start to feel taken advantage of, be it in a relationship, at work, maybe in another setting, I have to ask myself, Sarah, where have you failed to set a boundary down? Because you're feeling taken advantage of, which means you're allowing this person to continue to do something that is hurting you. And why aren't you setting a boundary around that? And I ask myself, do I love myself enough to set this boundary? Am I going to continue to be a doormat for this person to step on if I'm not verbalizing to them, hey, no, or that's not okay, or this is not how we're going to do this? Boundaries are actually self-love. They're actually self-care. And so I ask you today, do you love yourself enough to set that healthy boundary, be it at work, maybe with your boss, maybe with family, maybe in the neighborhood, whatever interactions you have with? And boundaries aren't even just with people. If you think about it, you can set boundaries around your time, your energy. Maybe you've been asked to be the PTA parent and take on an overtime task at work, and your neighborhood wants you to be president of the HOA, and your kid's soccer team needs a person to bring the juice and the cookies after the game. You can't do everything. And so even setting boundaries around your energy and your time, totally appropriate as well. Okay, think about those 3 mantras. In summary, do no harm, take no crap. Boundaries aren't bitchy, and I love myself enough to set healthy boundaries. I hope that you can implement those this week. And certainly there are plenty, I'm a huge advocate of therapy, obviously. There are lots of therapists out there who can help you understand boundaries more, learn more about boundaries, learn how to set them in your life. Quick tip. My favorite boundary setting authors are Dr. Henry Cloud and Townsend. They've written a bunch of books on boundaries. And quick Google search, Amazon, wherever you pick up your books, boundaries. Just look it up with Dr. Cloud and Townsend, and you'll find some great information there. And again, if you need a therapist who can help you work on boundary setting, 180 Counseling is a great place to go. We have 6 locations in the Triangle and Wilmington, and you can find us at www.180nc.com. That's ONE80nc.com if you need some good therapy to help you figure out how to boundary set. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day and set those boundaries. Thanks for listening.